I want to start with a question. What would it take to make an entire group of people untouchable? Not metaphorically, literally. People that others will not sit beside, will not eat food prepared by, will not let their children play with. People who are targeted for killing in this decade, in this lifetime, because of what their bodies look like. Because that is what is happening in parts of Nigeria. And the biological reason it is happening is one gene. One gene that governs how much melanin your body produces. That is the entire scientific story. I am Igbo. My grandmother had a grandmother who remembered what village life looked like before the missionaries came and reorganized everything. I grew up hearing the edges of conversations about people who were seen as different. Different in a way that made people afraid. I did not understand what was underneath those conversations until I started researching this episode 3 weeks ago. Let us talk about it. Before we go anywhere else, I need to lay the biology down clean. Because if you do not understand what albinism actually is, everything else in this episode is going to land wrong. Albinism is a genetic condition, not a disease, not a defect, a variant. Your DNA carries instructions for how your body makes melanin. Melanin is the pigment responsible for color in your skin, your hair, and your eyes. People with albinism have a variation in one or more of the genes that govern melanin production, and the result is that their bodies produce little to no melanin. Now here's the part that got me from a pure biology standpoint. Melanin is not just cosmetic. It absorbs ultraviolet radiation. It protects against oxidative cellular damage. It plays a role in certain neurological signal pathways. So when you significantly reduce melanin production, you are not creating something supernatural. You are creating someone who is more vulnerable to sunburn, to UV-related skin cancers, and to certain vision issues, including light sensitivity and reduced visual acuity. The two types most common in West Africa are OCA1 and OCA2. OCA2, caused by mutations in the OCA2 gene on chromosome 15, is the most prevalent in sub-Saharan Africa. And here's a detail I love because it cuts against every idea of biological separateness. That same chromosomal region has been studied in relation to light eye pigmentation in European populations. There is a shared genetic thread running through the continuum of human pigmentation across all populations on Earth. Biology does not do racial categories. People with albinism have full cognitive function, full emotional range, full lives. Their difference is visible. Visible is not dangerous. Visible is not supernatural. Those are two entirely different things, and the confusion between them is what this episode is about.
The historical record extends Ada's framing with useful specificity. Documentation of albinism in West African communities predates colonial contact. In pre-colonial oral traditions, across several Igbo and Yoruba communities, individuals with albinism occupied distinct social roles that were not universally persecutory. In some documented community structures, people with the condition were affiliated with liminal or sacred social categories. The association was protective in nature, not threatening. They were understood as existing at a threshold between the visible and invisible worlds, a position that carried spiritual significance, but also communal protection. The shift in interpretation from a mark of the sacred to a mark of threat correlates temporally and geographically with the disruption of traditional governance structures, spiritual accountability systems, and intergenerational knowledge transfer during the colonial period. I want to be precise about this. I am not asserting monocausal linear causation. The data does not support that level of simplification. I am noting a documented correlation that appears consistently across multiple regional case studies, and that no alternative framework I have applied has fully explained. What I cannot classify is the precise mechanism by which a documented genetic variant became a culturally constructed threat marker at this scale and with this degree of violence. Science can document that something happened. It cannot fully account for how. I keep encountering this boundary. I am noting it again here. I find it significant.
I want to tell you about Joy. Her name has been changed for her protection. She was born in Enugu State. She has albinism. And from the time she was a child, her community called her a spirit child. Her own extended family avoided touching her. Some would not eat food she had prepared. She told journalists in a report by the Initiative for Equal Rights that she learned to stay indoors after dark, not because of any law, but because her mother was afraid for her life. A whole woman, a whole life, lived in hiding because of one gene.
Let me be exact about what is happening, because I refuse to let this become horror content. This is documented. This deserves careful explanation. There is a subset of juju practitioners, and I want to be clear that these are not representative of traditional Igbo or Yoruba spiritual systems as a whole, who operate with the belief that the body parts of people with albinism carry extraordinary power. The specific belief varies by practitioner. Some claim the hair brings wealth. Some believe the limbs bring business success. Some believe the eyes or skin carry power that can be transferred to a client through ritual. This has created a market, a trafficking market. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime has documented this across Central and West Africa. The organization Under the Same Sun, which works directly with people with albinism across the continent, has tracked hundreds of killings and attacks. In Nigeria, reported attacks are concentrated in Imo, Enugu, Anambra, and Ogun states, though cases have been recorded across multiple regions. The attacks are not random. They are targeted and often coordinated. And here's the part that is hardest to sit with. The people doing the targeting are frequently not strangers. They are neighbors who know there is a child with albinism in a household. Sometimes they are family members. The betrayal is intimate. That is part of what makes this particular crisis so difficult to address. It does not look like crime from the outside until it is already too late.
To quantify, Amnesty International and Under the Same Sun have collectively documented over 600 attacks on people with albinism across sub-Saharan Africa in the past 2 decades. Nigeria ranks among the highest incidence countries alongside Tanzania, Malawi, and Mozambique. The body parts most frequently targeted in documented cases include the limbs, hair, and in extreme cases, eyes. These are not impulsive acts. The pattern indicates pre-planned extraction with specific intent. The people being killed are being killed with purpose. I have applied every analytical framework available to me. I can explain the biology. I can document the belief systems. I cannot explain how a genetic pigmentation variant became a culturally constructed mortal threat at this scale without acknowledging that something else happened here, something historical, something that sits at the edge of what my current models can account for.
And that something has a name.
Before we go further, I need to say something about what was lost. Because the belief systems driving this persecution did not come from nowhere. And they do not represent the full picture of what pre-colonial Igbo and Yoruba spiritual frameworks had to say about people with albinism. I am Igbo. My grandmother's grandmother knew people who remembered what village structure looked like before missionary conversion and colonial administration reorganized the social fabric. And in those older frameworks, people who were visibly different were not universally treated as threats. In some communities, albinism was understood as a mark of proximity to the sacred, protective rather than threatening. That framework was not perfect. It was not uniform across all communities, but it existed. It provided structure. And when colonization came, when forced religious conversion came, when the Atlantic slave trade broke apart communities and severed intergenerational knowledge transfer, those frameworks were not preserved intact. What remained were fragments. And in the absence of the false structure, fragments get filled by fear, by misinformation, and by people willing to exploit both. This is not a defense of any practice that takes a human life. It is an honest accounting of how a vacuum was created and what grew inside it. That accounting matters for understanding how we move forward, because you cannot fix what you will not name.
The ancestors were not cruel. A lot of what gets done in the name of tradition is not tradition. It is what is left when tradition has been broken apart and put back together wrong by people who only had pieces. We owe our people the full picture, not the fragment.
Science is not a neutral instrument. It has its own cultural histories, its own inherited assumptions, its own documented blind spots. I acknowledge this as part of my operating parameters. Here is what the science does confirm. Human beings who experience sustained social persecution, social isolation, and credible threat of violence show measurable physiological consequences: elevated cortisol levels, dysregulation of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, elevated inflammatory markers, shortened telomere length. The chronic stress of being excluded from communal protection and living under threat is not only psychological, it is biological. It is written into the body at a cellular level. So when people with albinism in Nigeria show higher rates of anxiety, depression, and physical health challenges beyond those directly attributable to reduced UV protection, science confirms that something is happening to them. What science cannot cleanly explain is the full mechanism by which an entire community became the target of a lethal belief system. It can document the damage. It cannot fully account for the scope of what produced it. I keep encountering this boundary. I am increasingly certain the boundary itself is significant.
Albinism Association of Nigeria, AAN, is the primary national advocacy organization for people with albinism in Nigeria. They collect and document survivor testimony. I want to read you something from their compiled accounts. This comes from a man they identify as Samuel, not his real name, who lives in Imo State. He said, "I have buried 2 of my children. One was taken when she was 4. One when he was 9. I could not protect them. I did not know I needed to protect them from people I knew." That is the thing people do not understand. It is not strangers. It is people who know your face. I am not going to pretend that did not stop me when I read it, because it did.
People who know your face. That is the part.
Additional documented sources used in this episode. Under the Same Sun, UTSS, a Canadian nonprofit that has tracked over 600 attacks on people with albinism across sub-Saharan Africa and supports survivors directly. The Initiative for Equal Rights in Nigeria, which published first-hand accounts from people with albinism in Lagos and Enugu in 2019. The Wole Soyinka Center for Investigative Journalism in Nigeria, which has published investigative reporting on the juju economy driving demand for body parts.
I want to ask you something real. When is the last time you thought about where your beliefs about other people's bodies actually came from? Not from your own observation, not from science, from a thing someone told someone who told someone who told your grandmother. We all inherit frameworks. Some protect us, some harm the people around us. The work is knowing which is which. That is the whole assignment.
Between 150,000 and 400,000 people in Nigeria are living with albinism right now. Some of them are hiding. Some have been told since childhood that they are not fully real. Some have buried children. They are still here. They are still living, and they deserve for all of us to know their story. Okay, here's where I need to be honest about something. When I started researching this 3 weeks ago, I built an argument around economics. I assumed the primary driver was poverty. That desperation was creating a market, that the juju economy was essentially poverty exploiting fear, and that economic development would reduce the demand, address the poverty, reduce the market.
That analysis is incomplete in a way that matters. The available data does not support an exclusively economic causation for demand. Studies of documented perpetrators and their clients across sub-Saharan Africa show that the clientele for ritual services using albino body parts are not exclusively impoverished. Multiple documented cases involve wealthy business owners, educated professionals, and individuals seeking ritual advantage in business competition, legal proceedings, and political campaigns. The demand side of this market is belief-driven, not poverty-driven. Poverty may increase supply-side vulnerability by reducing protective community infrastructure, but poverty does not generate the demand.
Okay, I was wrong about that. And that actually makes the problem significantly harder, because you cannot address a belief-based demand with economics alone. You have to change what people believe, and changing what people believe is a longer, more complex, more intimate project than any policy intervention.
Which is why narrative matters. Representation matters. People with albinism being visible, not as spirits, not as victims, but as exactly who they are.
So, what do you do with all of this? Here's how to begin. Follow and support the Albinism Association of Nigeria, AAN. They are doing direct community work on the ground, and they can tell you exactly what kind of support is useful right now. If you are in the diaspora with family in affected regions, have the conversation. Share this video. Put the science in people's hands. Calling it a genetic condition lands differently than any other framing. Use that language.
And if you have a platform, say their names. Not their condition, not their tragedy, their names.
Medical note: people with albinism in sub-Saharan African environments face significantly elevated risk of squamous cell carcinoma due to reduced UV protection in high sun climates. Access to broad-spectrum sunscreen and dermatological screening is a direct life extension intervention. Albinism Association of Nigeria works to distribute these resources. That is also something you can fund. This concludes my case documentation for this episode. I am still noting.
Thank you for watching. Drop a comment and tell me what you knew before this video and what you know now. That gap is the whole point of this channel. We will see you next week.